Welcome everyone, I'm Saliha Bava.
I'm Sheila McNamee, and I would like to start by pointing out all the work that Saliha has done. It really was, as Ken said, this dearth of connectedness face to face from the pandemic. And it was really your idea to just try, can we do a small little symposium and have some people come together and test it and see? Because we also, have the carbon footprint problem or question and so forth. And so you all are a testament to the success and the desire to be together. But Saliha, your idea was a sparkling idea. That's a word you like to use. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all. Well, I couldn't have done this, as I was saying earlier, without the support of everybody who is behind the scene, and slowly but surely you will see them and you will know who they are. So if you see them, just give them a high five, thank them, because it's not a one-person show. And most importantly, as I think, Ken, you've been saying, we've been building this. What's Taos Institute? What's the Symposium? As Anne was saying, the Marriage and Family Therapy Program at Mercy University, and all the staff at Mercy University. We are building this together. And so today we are going to be talking, Sheila and I are going to be talking about, especially if you're new, anybody who's new to Taos, let me ask you that. Let's okay, that's great. Folks who are new to this idea of social construction or relational practices, anybody? Yeah, a little bit. Does somebody not know somebody else in this room? Okay. Not know people in the room. Yeah. Like at least, or let me put it differently. Are you here by yourself and you don't know anybody in this room? Okay. Welcome. So it is brave, I agree.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask those of you who are more connected either to Mercy or to Taos or to these ideas to just reach out to each other and welcome folks, because that's right there is what relational practice is all about, is connecting, coming together. But I thought we could start with what is socio-relational practices and why does it matter?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways to answer that question, and we could go very theoretical and philosophical, or we could go very practical. And I think at the most fundamental level, if you imagine you're no longer seeing individual people, but you're seeing more of a flow of the in-between. I have a friend who is an engineer, and he studies heat transfer. And he thought that what I did was always kind of froofy, frilly, relational stuff, And so I asked him to describe what he did, and he said, well, in the laboratory, okay, number one, there's a laboratory. I have an object here and an object here, and I put on a special apparatus and I look at it and I no longer see the objects. I just see the flow of heat, energy between. And I said, well, we do exactly the same thing. That's what it means to be relational, is to look at the way our unfolding practice and connecting with one another, how we respond to each other, shows that meaning is never necessarily sedimented. It can be. Yeah. It can be when we sediment it in our patterned ways of being. So I find it quite liberating to take the emphasis off looking at an individual who we judge, evaluate as being right or wrong, good or bad, and instead look at what people together create when they come together.
Yeah, yeah. I love, you said that the chemistry experiment kind of a lab where what's happening between us, right? And there's always something happening between us, but sometimes we don't have the language, or because it's not as tangible as this bottle, either we don't have the language or the cultural repertoires or ways to speak about that in between space and that the energy between, so to speak, right? And I'm a therapist, psychotherapist, family therapist, systems therapist, but this is not a conference for only therapists, even though the marriage and family therapy program is hosting it. We are coming from this place of how do people come together? And what happens in that space between people? And how do we create something when it's deeply felt, especially when it is not working? We know something is not working. But when it is working, whatever that thing is between that, the energy, how do we relate to it? How do we talk about it? How do we understand it? And one of the ways I feel the language is to refer to it as relational practices. And it's such a big term at one level because there's so many ways people talk about relationality and relational practices. So what's different about it, the way the constructionists talk about it, that's different than the chemist or even the psychodynamic people or even systems thinkers do? Yeah.
I think that oftentimes the relational is tagged on sort of like we're still looking at the individual and who the individual is in relation to or what the individual is in relation to. And from my point of view, the individual kind of recedes completely. And if we, particularly in this contemporary moment where there's so much diversity and divisiveness as well, it really helps to be able to not look at a person as an evil other and make a judgment, but to understand how are we making sense of our different perspectives, our different beliefs, which opens up this idea of this realization, I should say, that there are multiple beliefs and multiple ways of understanding any singular event, any singular person. And so I think that's a very different view of the relational than, say, a psychodynamic view of the relational. It also reminds me of the difference between Berger and Luckman, for those of you who know the social construction of reality. That vision of the social constructionism says, I as an individual interact in the world, and then I construct the world myself based on that in my head.
There's an internal perturbation that happens.
Which is completely different than what we're talking about here. And I find actually using the term social construction is probably better not to use it because people go, to that place, and to talk more about the relational.
Yeah.
Because but of course that also has its confusion, right?
Right. And that's why I prefer to use the word social-relational, because I think there are several constructs around the notion of relationship or relational practices that centers relationship, and it replaces the individual with the relationship as another entity.
Right.
And you were talking earlier about the unfolding. So for me, it's the activity of making together, of co-creating, that is being centered in the way we are thinking about relational, but we're all swimming in these waters called the social waters. And they're shaping us as much as we are making them. And so if we move towards the relational, how might we continue to bring the social along? And so for me, I struggle in that tension. And you and I, when we were preparing, we were talking about this because those of you familiar with Sheila's work, she's talked, and it comes from you, that what I'm going to step into is it's not, in family therapy especially, we have this thing called the onion model, which is the social is the outer circle and the individual is the inner circle. So you can call it the Russian doll, or this idea of levels. And for me, what we're talking is the fluid flow between the social and the relational, and how we're all in our everyday relationships shaping the social even as it is shaping us. So I'm curious, as we move, at least in the Taos, there's been that shift of the language. How do you continue to think about the social as you speak about the relational? Because I know you haven't left it behind in that sense, but there is confusion there in terms of.
I think it's really hard for people to, when I talk about the social, I think about what other people refer to as dominant discourses, sort of basic way of talking about that, taken for granted ways of being. Okay, all children should be educated. You know, you'll it's illegal to not send your children to school or homeschool them. When you're ill, you go to a medical professional. You know, all these taken for granted things, so such that when you ask why did you do that, the response is, well, that's
This
what
is
you
how
do.
it is.
That's just what you do.
Yeah.
So for me, it's awakening the notion that those social that social agreements, more or less, of this is what one does, only remains in place insofar as we, in our daily interactions, in our relational beings, keep those things alive. So every time you go to a health professional, you are keeping that belief system that when you're ill, you go to a health professional. You're keeping alive. So it connects us that we start seeing our own fingerprints on the very things that we think we have to do because, you know, from God's eye view from nowhere, that's what you're supposed to do. So we have to stop thinking about the social as this God's eye view from nowhere and recognize how intimately we are responsible for it. And we can change it, we can keep it the same, we can question it, we can do all sorts of things. And I think that relationship between the social and the relational hasn't been examined in a lot of the work that people have done in the relational constructionist realm. It's remained mostly at the what I call micro level of daily interactions with others and within the environment, and never making that connection. So making that connection then makes our work very political.
Yeah. And I want to come back to the word political. Before we jump there, I want to say one thing. As we were organizing this symposium, language was moving so fluidly. We started last January to March thinking about it. And I don't know, those of you remember in the US, the New York Times, I think, published a whole list of words that were banned. And one word after another was getting banned. And I felt that in my, it was around March, and I'm like, what am I doing? Should I not use certain words? And I went back and forth, we're calling it co-creating social worlds, which is the kind of the umbrella. And then there is the sub-theme. Anybody remember the sub-theme? Social something, right?
Bingo.
It is, right? So it is reimagining our personal, our public, and social lives, and political lives. There it is, political, social, right? I felt the dread of even calling the word political into being. It's not about who am I, who's going to receive it, how are they going to receive it, how will it create trouble for me, my university, for this place, right? But it was like we have to reclaim what is political. And so when you said political, I'm thinking, what do you mean political? Because I have a lot of things to say about this, as you can imagine.
I do imagine.
But what are you referring to when you say political?
No, I think I don't think it's about politics per se. It is everything we do. If we see this inseparability between the social and the relational, if you want to call it that, the micro and the macro, you know, we could name it many different things. But if you see that those things cannot exist in isolation, then everything has some kind of power to create possibilities and constraints.
Mhm.
And so the question always is, what are the constraints? Who's feeling the constraints? Who isn't feeling the constraints? Who has the possibilities? You know,
Yeah.
all of those questions. And so to me, that's political.
Yeah, yeah. I'm thinking back to a quote of yours that I take and I step into what I call political, and that is what people do together and what they're doing makes. I'm paraphrasing you, you're probably much more eloquent at it, but I think that's what's political, in my opinion, where if you think a lot of us talk about politics today as in electoral politics.
Yeah.
And for me, political is this coming together. As you know, a lot of gatherings can sometimes be blocked because of what people might do together. And I'm not even talking about protests, I'm just talking about people coming together and being in conversation, people coming together and having a party, people coming together and making something because we start connecting and something arrives from those connections, whether they're sense making or interpersonal connections, right? And that making of something is where imagination flourishes. But that's the place of danger. Because what if you plan to do something that I don't want you doing? How do I maintain law and order if you start mucking around with our system? So for me, political is everywhere in what we do because, like you said, it's a choice point at one level.
Yeah.
And I felt the dread for the first time in my life around using that word because I feel it's like, among other words, it's hijacked.
Yeah.
And so our relational practice is political.
Absolutely. I would say absolutely.
Am I creating trouble by putting those two words together?
Not to me, but I mean, I think let's make a small shift
Yeah.
to political as most people talk about
Yeah.
it in terms of things happening in the world today that
Yeah.
can be quite disturbing and absolutely divisive. To the extent that we link political and relational, then I think we all have the ability to see that what we do matters, even if, you know, you can't bring peace to the Middle East. You can do things in your everyday life that make a difference and make a difference, as Gregory Bateson says, the difference that makes a difference. It's going to grow into something greater. And I think we need to, given the complexity of what we face today, I think we all need that. We need to know that what we do matters. And so you could think of it with, you know, political with a capital P or a small p, but just to realize that opening ourselves up to the idea that there are always going to be multiple perspectives. There's no way in the world that there could be a universal truth ever. And there's no way that everybody is always going to agree. So let's just stop putting an emphasis on agreement or resolution. Notice how in the news and everywhere, that even in our workplaces, resolution, agreement, those are the key terms.
Consensus?
Consensus, that's a dirty word in my world. But understanding, could we replace those terms? No agreement, no resolution, no consensus, but new forms of understanding. Can we find a new way of understanding the evil other? That's a change. It may sound like an innocent, not important change, but I think it's important.
Well, I think you're talking to something in my book is very important, is how in language, how in interaction, how in talk we create our social worlds, right? And people have called me the language police sometimes.
Yeah, I've been called that too.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. But it is not whether it's the right word, it's what the word is constructing in the way we're using and what we are creating through that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think right now we're living in these political times. They're always political, but these times for me is like discursive times. We're literally seeing how with language social reality is being created, right?
Yeah.
So if you're not, and I want to know, why is consensus a dirty word? I want to come back to that in a second. But what words could we be playing with to further our imagination on what is togetherness? What are we trying to do if you're not doing any of these things, right?
Curiosity is the one that comes immediately to mind.
Yeah.
Instead of the impulse to judge or reject or what have you, to be curious. Where does that idea come from? We could say more about that, but another term that I think is critically important is reflexivity. You know, we all speak with such certainty all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know that this is the way it should be. They're wrong, we're right. But, you know, to train yourself to have this alarm that goes off when you hear yourself say something like that or think it, and say, well, how else could it be? What are other options? And when I ask myself that question, then I'm in a position to be able to ask the other that kind of question, which expands the possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, you know, curiosity, reflexivity, you know, again, more of a process focus than a atomized focus.
Yeah. I'm feeling distracted for a second. I want to say for another 10 minutes more or so, we will be talking. So jot down your questions, because then we'll be opening it up for Q&A. So it's not just we are going to be doing all the talking, right? Because I have lots of questions coming in, and I'm hoping that you have questions coming in too. So coming back to curiosity, how do I'm struck by like what I was feeling in my body in trying to plan for this symposium. How to stay curious of the other and not just think about it as evil, but how to be in dialogue with processes that are so further from me, yet have very real impacts, right? Am I going to be in this country? Should I travel? Should I not? These are very personal things to me.
Mm-hmm.
And organizationally, like just organizing this symposium was an example. As a university, we are going through a restructuring process, right? And there is a hierarchy here, and being curious helps. But when the process seems further away from you, how to stay in dialogue?
Yeah.
Not only when you're further away from having that, but also when there is such difference that it can even create conflict.
Mm-hmm.
So that, and I know you write a lot about morality, and I was thinking about talking about social orders and morality as we think about difference and conflict and curiosity.
What you just said makes me go to a very practical place, not a conceptual place at all. But, you know, somebody once called me and said, they were new at a university, and said, how do you make a decision what committees to join and serve on? And I said, I think of what are the places in the university that would become like my laboratory to try out asking these kinds of questions, being curious, not confrontational about differences. So like when there's that gap, you know, that you mentioned, like the hierarchy, the administration, and then you and your colleagues on the ground dealing with things, that's what I would do. I would try to get myself into some sort of place where I could be in conversation, not confronting, and not, you know, like get on a committee or whatever, a task force. And that sort of way of very gently and invitingly
Mm-hmm.
offer another perspective
Mm-hmm.
instead of jarringly say, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
You've got to
Yeah.
change.
Yeah.
And, that's why, to me, I always hold on to this idea. We can't do that in all domains. We can't, walk down to Washington, D.C. and, walk into Congress and, do that. But what can we do?
But there is a version of doing that. Like
Sure.
that's the lobbying version. That's
Yeah.
the go meet your senator version
Right.
kind of a thing. But I do agree that when times are so stifling, one of the things, and some of you may be following. I'm blocking her name. American historian Kathy, not Robinson,
No,
Richardson.
Heather.
Okay,
Heather
Richardson. You know who I'm talking about. Yes. And she's talking about American history. And I bring her into say because one of the things that happened that she's talking about is the curb on our imagination, right? And what's the point? That's the point, which is to feel what's the point, right? That's what one of the posts that I was reading about her. And I think what you're talking about seems like a micro interactional moment, but it is still a very felt. And I have a colleague somewhere in the room here, Helge, and we are both faculty association members, and we have lots of conversation of what's going on in our institution. I'm also a member of, I forget what the name of the committee is right now, but there was the strategic planning committee. I should know that, right? Strategic planning is very important. But there was this, speaking of language and speaking of curiosity, this is a very practical example of it, that we were in conversation, the strategic plan was presented, and the language was all about, I would say, market-based economical organizational structure. Mostly about our roles, not about our relationships.
Yeah.
So there's something about the human aspect. We want to be the best at workplace, but it was also about our staff, not about us. And when I say us, again, I'm talking about people versus roles. And it was very simple and I wasn't thinking, oh, this is social construction, this is language game. I said, we have all these role-based language here. What if we brought the human-based language a little bit more? And the human resource person went, I get it. And they were really excited. And I think that's a small example of what we're talking about.
Good example.
There are so many places in our life every day where we could be asking questions and be curious about how something is getting constructed, how something is being framed, how something is being made.
Yeah.
That has very real, I mean, we can say we have very long conversations about what's going on, but I think it's happening in all our communities and all our organizations where we can bring that gaze of curiosity.
Mhm. Yeah.
But something shuts us down, and I'm going to keep coming back to that.
But
Yeah.
in any organization, whether it's a university or anything else, even in families, somebody makes a statement, somebody who apparently has more power, and if others don't like it, it's attack.
Yeah.
And we all know, what do we do when we're attacked? We go into self-defense mode. And so then you just get this ping pong of conflict back and forth, and it doesn't go anywhere because we're trying to do the things that I don't think we should do, have a resolution, figure out who's right, who's wrong. So I think just the way in which we position ourselves in these conversations about our differences is the critical piece. And it's the relational piece.
Mm-hmm.
Do we position ourselves in a dogmatic way that our truth is better than another's truth, that we know better? Or do we position ourselves as co-creators of what is possibly going to unfold next? And positioning ourselves that way leads to different ways of interacting, different conversations, different questions, different poise, I think.
So I want to take that into the practical realm. Positioning ourselves differently requires some amount of something, courage, because you're also getting positioned, right? Our position, I may position myself, but I'm also being told, know your place. So how do I continue to be in dialogue as a co-creator when part of the discourse or dialogue is, we are not doing that, we're doing this, right? Because these are language games at one level.
Yeah.
And in such a language game, even if I'm co-creating, willing to expand, be in dialogue, and this is a question that I get asked a lot. If the other one doesn't want to be in dialogue, how do you stay in dialogue? How do you collaborate? And
Seduction.
Seduction. Say more.
I think I would say it's fun to engage in those kind of conversations when you act in a way that the other doesn't expect you to act. If they expect you to be fiery and upset and you're not that way, that's seductive. And it's not easy. I'm not saying we can do it all the time, but I think there are ways to start. And also there are frames that we can construct for ourselves, where instead of the other person being this all-powerful provost or whatever, you can say, she really wishes she was a faculty and able to teach the students instead of having to do all this administrative work. If I have that frame, then I have a different way of relating, and it's softer.
Yeah.
So I think if we embrace this notion of not an isolated individual, but relational processes that we're all engaged in, and they're all so different with multiple meanings and so forth, that positioning allows us to just be more fluid, to move among the multiple resources that we have for acting.
Yeah. I call that relational play.
Yes, you do.
That there is all these possibilities that are existing, even when it feels like it's hunkered down time and there's only a couple of possibilities that are available. It doesn't the image that comes to my mind is, and I'm sure some of you have seen it, where the soldier's standing with the rifle and the flower or the rose at the end of the rifle. Like, it changes it. Like, who would think about putting a flower there, right? Like, does it stop a war? Maybe, maybe not, right? But I think that piece is what I'm thinking of, that when you have only a couple of choices, you still have a response back, a responsiveness of, how do I play with what's being offered to me in a way that might humanize or might expand or even bring that reflexivity into the game, right? So it's like, again, you're being told what your place is, but also my place is not just in that role. My place is also in the world. This is where I come back to the socio-relational. That I don't have just accountability in this relationship, but I have accountability in the larger realms that hosts this relationship. And so how do I play in that space?
You're saying this, and the idea of play reminds me of several years ago, we had a conference in San Diego on conflict. And we invited this guy, I'm not going to remember his name or any of the details, but he had written this book and I had seen a video of him, and he had this great improv. He said he was in a city for a conference or some meeting, and late at night he was walking back to his hotel, but he got lost and he was walking through a not great area. And this guy jumps out from the dark and says, "I'll have your wallet." And he says, you have my wallet? I've been looking for it. Where did you find it? Oh my God. And the guy just, it threw him off so completely that he just ran away.
Yeah.
So it's that sort of, that ability now. That's pretty remarkable to be able to turn on a dime when you're, being mugged in a dark alley. But that's, I think, what you're talking about with the play.
Yeah. I'm looking at time. I know we can go on. I'm having an idea here. What if we take a few minutes to have people turn and talk to each other before we open up for the Q&A? Is that? Sure. Because I think we've been traveling in so many different realms. And I'm wondering if you'll just, and some of these chairs can turn, so you can even turn back and just self-organize into 2s or 3s as you wish. What's coming up for you? What's rolling? Let's take about 5 minutes.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yes. We're having very good conversations.
Okay, we're curious what you're talking about.
You. Uh-oh.
No, we aren't? No? Okay.
We have 2 mics, one on this end of the room, the other. And so just give us a moment for the mics to travel to you.
Just reflections or questions, comments.
Yeah.
Just to kind of jump off.
I think that's a great question. I have, can I jump in? And
Please do.
I'll speak as a therapist first. Thanks for that question, Abby. I think how to speak about our system, which is our nervous system, is itself a social discourse. So when we start out by thinking about being regulated or dysregulated, it itself is a language by which I am making sense about what's going on. I sometimes prefer to say, oh, my body's talking to me. I got to do something here. It's not being quiet. I got to listen here, man. Which is it is, I think I can take this leap to say what you are calling dysregulation, which is, or I can't sleep, or what I'm saying body is talking to me, maybe about similar. I don't know for sure, of course. But I think right there is this process of making meaning, and which language games are we going to be leaning on in how to even start thinking about what is rising in my body. What's the message? Bateson would talk about, like, right, that's communication. It's an information. It's a loop. You could go systemic on that. So I would say let's pause and think, how are we being structured or organized with the different language games that is reducing us to our biology as opposed to the sociobiology of it all. If that makes sense, right? Because I think that's a neoliberal act too, to reduce everything, especially reduction to biological systems, is to then say this is natural. Then we totally obscure the social and the relational. And that language construction, that system of making meaning is the socio-relational part that I'm talking about. That for me, if you want to use it, let's be vigilant about that. Yeah. But what are you thinking? But thank you. That's good. I want to come back to, so what do you do about it? In a way, I'm saying start by saying, how should I construct meaning? In one way, that's my first step. What are you thinking, Sheila?
Oh, I agree with you. And I think pragmatically to name, to recognize and acknowledge what's going on physically, biologically. And I think using that, the more we reflect on that, it's another way of speaking. There's a book called The Body Speaks that addresses exactly this issue. And I think, very trite kind of comment, but practice, that's how we do it. It's hard at first because it's not the way we've been raised, but we're having this conversation right now. And so the next time you get like, about something, say, okay, what's going on and how can I, draw on other resources to kind of shift this into a more productive interaction or something like that.
also, maybe we're being trained to think as dysregulation to shut down the information that's needed, which is we need to be dysregulated. This is the time. If something is not right, it's not about regulation. It's not about me. It's about us. I need to be able to reach out to say, this is effed up. And so I think we also need to think about what is this language game of regulation trying to do, not to ignore our role in our body and respond to it, but what's the larger social discourse attempting to do, right? Especially when mental health is being so individualized as opposed to acknowledging the interactional and the social, right? So I think there is a lot here, Abby. I can go on. Let's have a drink, even though I don't drink. So drink water. Yeah, it was another hand. Yeah.
This is maybe a couple of degrees off.
So a colleague that some here know, John Burnham from Birmingham, England, talks about self-reflexivity and relational reflexivity, which I find really useful to add that relational reflexivity concept. So self-reflexivity would be constantly questioning, am I so certain that this would be a good thing to do? Is there something else I could do? How else might this person be looking at this? You know, we're constantly questioning instead of just acting and being certain about what's going on. Relational reflexivity is to turn that out and say, hey, is this the kind of interaction you were hoping we would have? Are there questions or topics that you want to talk about that we haven't been talking about? So you bring the other in to a recognition of that this moment is something we are co-creating together, and neither one of us is in control. And so I think those are if we step into a modernist individualist worldview, there's no place for reflexivity at all. You know, you just act with certainty because that's what's right. And that's the way you've been trained to be a competent professional or a competent mother or father, what have you. So reflexivity is such a critical piece to this relational dialogic way of being, because we throw certainty aside and enter into that ambiguous space.
Yeah, I'm looking at Harleen here because she's my mentor, and I think about not knowing in terms of when you enter into that ambiguous space, you're entering into a creative space. You don't know what is yet to emerge, but how might you lean into that uncertainty and the not knowing while we have so many ideas that we do know, right? Like, how do you hold all of that lightly? So each of us will use the word reflexivity and may mean something slightly different. And so even that kind of curiosity about how I mean, again, we could spend the whole evening talking about, like, what do you mean by the coherence, right? And for me, I was there when you said the word coherence, because how do I come to know what is coherence? Who determines it? Like, it's the word grounded. I've always struggled in my life to know what's grounding, right? I had to start learning to trust myself that whoever's saying, now ground yourself, feel your center, that what I am thinking or feeling as my center is the center that they are talking about. Every time I go for a ear checkup or eye checkup and they're like, so is this clear? I'm like, how clear does it need to be before I can say yes and no?
Exactly.
Right? Like, I don't know, but it feels clear. It's clear enough. Is enough. And then am I cheating myself or am I not? Like, it's hard being me. Sheila was having dinner last night. She said, it must be really hard being you. I'm like, yes, it is. So those are my internal parts, so to speak, that language of talking. But also, it's like, how can I have that conversation with my partner? Right? So I think I love what you're saying, which is step into that ambiguity, have those conversations, because in those conversations, in those relationships, we are building, for me, the coherence. And this is what Bakhtin talks about in my interpretation, is the polyvocality. It's not about choosing one voice, it's that we are multiple voices, and that the authoritarian condition tries to train us into that authoritative single voice. And part of the relational practice of defiance, for those of you who are seeking defiance or resistance, is to be in that multivocality space, right? So I don't know if I'm speaking. Yeah, yeah. Kathy, and then we come to, I see three hands there, but we'll start with Kathy. Yeah. And you got the hands? Yes. Okay. Thanks.
I think, I would add to that in a play, of course, and being, silly. I agree. It's hard to be angry with someone when you're doing that, but also like having a meal together or preparing a meal, just, taking it out of this context of we've got to get to the bottom of this, which is that resolution, that I think we need to shove aside. But creating a context where people can come together in a more humanizing way. And, a really good example, and it's like been beaten to death by all of us, the Taos people, is the Public Conversation Project, where they bring people with diametrically opposing views on public issues together, and they start with a dinner. And no one can talk about the issue, like if it's abortion, that's banned. And what happens at a dinner party amongst strangers is you always find you have something in common. Mm-hmm. And then they go into a room and have this dialogue with certain rules. I mean, there's a whole lot more to this, but they're going in as humans, connected in some way to each other. And so I think that's what you're saying. It's play and all sorts of other things can attain that.
Yeah, I was thinking about, Kathy, I mean, you play. And by the way, as you introduce speaking, commenting, reflecting, do say your names, because I'm calling out people's names because I know them, but I apologize for not saying that earlier. I'm thinking about, I write about play in different forms, and often we think about play in that silliest form, right? And where you started for me was play in its revolutionary way, which is to create something that has not yet arrived. And just because we don't know how to go on doesn't mean we cannot co-create and make something by dancing with it. And I think that form of play is not a cultural repertoire. But if you look at it, that's that thing that happens between people. We had some touchstones here of what we were going to talk about, but this is a play. It's emerging right now. And this is happening amongst people all the time, but we don't have the cultural repertoire to name it. And that's why I call it relational play, because we are doing it even when we don't know we are doing it. And for me, this is imagination as play, dialogue as play, the dialectics, the tension as play, right? And play as liberation. We don't have to do it the way we have been doing it. We can do something else. And if you're not read Rua Benjamin, check her out, because she says the first answer that comes is, oh, we don't do it this way. Why not? So I can go on, but we've got a couple of more hands. So thank you for that. Oh, yeah. I organize a symposium.
You perform anger, but that's the point. You perform it and you realize you're performing it. Okay, got that out of my system. Now what can I do instead? What can be productive? So, I mean, we are not perfect, and none of us can forever and in every moment, be so beautifully process relationally oriented. But if that kind of immediate response we have, we realize through self-reflexivity is like, oh yeah, okay, there I am doing that, judging, evaluating, and so forth. Then you say, okay, that was a good performance. I do that really well. What's the next one I can do that would be better? So,
yeah. I also think about when we think about words, Bakhtin talks about words live in a social context. So all words arrive with something, and then we make it ours and it leaves with something else. Again, paraphrasing. So I think about it as if we came up with a list of words, which I like that idea, and it's all the social media folks, hashtag CSW26, create words. These are the words we're promoting. Go for it. Let's make an experiment. Let's play. But are we then not doing the agreement disagreement thing? Like, are we not being responsive to the band to say, let's create our, I mean, it's a game again, right? So I like the idea, and I'm like,
But Gregory Bateson says a difference is a relationship.
Yeah.
And we cannot, and he also says categorization is not a great thing, but we cannot avoid it, because once we name something, we've put it in this box and not in that box. So it's not that we should avoid these things, it's simply that we should be aware that this is going in this box. And once we say that, well, what other boxes could it go in? And so it opens up. And I think that's
the light touch.
Yeah.
That we cannot move through the world without making sense. But how can we hold our sense making, whether it's language or categories or labels, lightly, right? And to recognize that we are in that process of making, and it may be given to us, but we can remake it. And that's the spirit I'm taking that language game on. So yes, let's come up with a list. Let's just see. There are Post-its out there, folks. We have a storyline that's starting out. I'm going to build on this. Try to use the words, the preferred words you would want to see more in the world, into that storyline. I've just issued another challenge there. So whatever that may make sense. But I'm looking at time, maybe two more quick comments. We have one more comment there, and then we're coming back to Janet and Dan. Yep.
Yeah, but I think understanding is a place to stand as well. So we could understand, for example, that we have very different views. We come from very different communities, and they're in conflict. But if I come to understand where your beliefs have come from and how they make sense to you, I'm in a different place than saying you're wrong. I can still disagree with you. I'm not sanctioning you, but I'm acknowledging our difference with new understanding of the coherence it has for you. And so I think that gives us a place to stand as well. And hopefully you could do the same.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I think, one more comment. How are we on time? One more comment or question. Yeah, let's do it. Thank you. Thank you. I think what you're sparking for me also is this idea that we're all complicit in some ways. This idea, the best example I have is I will work at Mercy. My retirement is invested in the market. I'm hoping to live in this world having enough whatever monies that comes, while this market is the one that I'm also critiquing, right? Like that complicitness is something we have to all look and live with. And it's not the us and them, we are the us. And there may be degrees of differences, but how does that difference become a thing that we can play with, come together, remake with new language, new play, a new version of whichever version we are living right now. We are all going to be having different versions when we walk out from the symposium. But this thing that we're doing right now is what the symposium is. But I'd really appreciate you all coming here, and thank you so much for helping us open this evening with this kind of a dialogue. And I hand over to you.
I just want to thank you as well, but I want to add two words that I think we should put on the list, and sparked, Paul, a little bit by what you just said, but they're really important words to me: risk and vulnerability. And you take the risk and you fail, you're vulnerable, and it's going to happen. But I think plunging into the relational void is, maybe it's not a void, but whatever, is what's important. Yeah.
Well, that's beautifully said, but now I have to say it. Jot down your word. Think about a word as you leave, because the word that's coming to my mind is dangerous. Be dangerous.
We also had seductive earlier.
Seductive too. Yes, seductive too. So on that dangerously seductive
Yeah.
tone, let's take a pause, and Anne is going to take us into the next things. And thank you all. Just give us a few more minutes and she'll lead us into a next stage. Thank you.